Welcome to Diagnosing Dx, the podcast giving diagnostics the platform it deserves. While therapeutics and devices often take centre stage, diagnostics is the engine driving precision medicine. I'm your host, David Philby, and each week we spotlight the innovators, breakthroughs, and real-world challenges shaping the future of DX. In this episode of Diagnosing DX, I'm joined by Scott O'Brien, who helped shape GenMark's journey from a small startup to a 1.8 billion acquisition by Roche. We dive into why commercial strategy can't be an afterthought, how GenMark differentiated against bigger players through workflow and customer experience, and what founders today can learn about perseverance, course correction, and building sticky customer relationships. Hi Scott, welcome to the show this week. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me, David.
All good, yeah. Excited to have you on the show because we have a really interesting historic story, I suppose is probably the best term for it, in diagnostics, something that these stories often get lost, but I think it's important to shine a light on what's happened in the industry, and hopefully that goes out to the industry and the people, because really people are really passionate about it and they want to attach to these stories. So I'm excited to tell the story today and focus on GenMark. But before we do that, it'd be great to hear a bit about you, your background, who are you, and what you've been doing.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for that. So, from the perspective of career anyway, I started out on the science side. So, was a microbiologist from an education perspective, uh, spent many years at the research bench, and then made a decision that ultimately I wasn't going to pursue PhD or anything along those lines, and wanted to get into the life sciences and diagnostic space. So that was really my shift. I moved out to San Diego to kind of enable that vision, and got my first job in 2001 at Strategy, which was a smaller life science tools player with an emphasis, I would say, on a few things, but one of them was real-time PCR. Was kind of one of their core pillars, and that's an area that I had some knowledge, some prior experience, and really focused on.
Wow. Um, what was that? What was the transition early on from? When did it happen from sort of going scientific, technical over to commercial? When did that happen in your career?
Yeah, certainly. So I joined Strategy, and initially they were looking at me for an R&D role, and I cited that I really didn't want to be a bench tech anymore, so I started in technical support there, and after a couple of years, moved into a more commercial role, and then eventually uh, focused on product marketing. And I would say that's the area that I've spent most of my career in life sciences and diagnostics, is on that product marketing side. And the benefit that I got there is, I think my early days and kind of continuing throughout my career is really every aspect of marketing. So it was from very product conception all the way through to product discontinuation and everything in between. So including some of that outbound marketing piece and education and all that. So got a really good breadth of experience from everything of how do you design and develop all the way through to how do we effectively sell and commercialize. And I use that experience early days to continue to evolve my career.
Hmm. Did you early on feel um, that your personality would be a better fit in something more commercial? And was that something that you sort of intentionally followed, or was it something that you were sort of, you know, give the company you were in sort of thought you were best placed to do?
I think from a perspective of personality, what I wanted to blend was really my technical acumen, which is something I still am passionate about. I enjoy understanding technology, reading peer-reviewed literature, but get more customer interaction. I think ultimately in this space, we're providing solutions that should make things better, easier, faster, cheaper, and having that direct customer interaction was something I valued and was important to me.
Mm.
And I got experience doing that early in my days at Strategy. And that really solidified my thinking. So it was clear to me that my goal was to be, marketing slash sales, commercial, but to be very customer centric. And even as a product manager in my first 15 years of my career in that space, I spent a lot of time with field salespeople, a lot of time in front of customers, and really that level of engagement. And that's important to make sure that you're not only delivering the right solutions, but that you're messaging them and providing the right support along the way.
That's actually really interesting, Scott, because I think when I asked that question, because it's obviously it's a path well trodden in terms of scientific academically, go and work in sort of early career roles, find, and then at some point pivot into commercial positions. But whenever I ask that question, why, quite often the answer is personality in terms of found myself bored,
Yeah,
didn't want to be on the bench, but actually you were much more driven about the access to customers
right.
because that's who had the problem, and ultimately where you were going to find the need for solutions. And that's actually, the sort of
Absolutely.
the craving of hearing it directly from the customer is
Yeah.
actually a really interesting desire, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the comment, and I think that I would say that when I look back at, especially the experience at GenMark, which I know we'll get into, is that was one of the paramount aspects of, I would say, some of our secret weapon to the success of that company was that customer centric approach, and
Hmm.
worked at many companies before and after GenMark, and I would say that that was one company that excelled above everybody in how attentive we were to the end user, to the lab technician, to the lab director, to even in some cases the physicians that were leveraging our technology.
Yeah, interesting. And then how did you end up at GenMark?
Yeah, certainly. So, I spent many years in the life sciences space at Strategene, which got acquired by Agilent. I was in those two companies for 10 years. I moved to Illumina mainly because I wanted to start seeing how we could leverage sequencing in the clinical space. And ultimately, what I found there was Illumina wasn't quite mature enough or ready to kind of jump fully into that. So it caused me to make a pretty deliberate decision that I wanted to go into diagnostics. For so long, a lot of what I was doing would lead to new discoveries and new research and publications or grants, which is great. But I wanted to get into a space where what we were doing was impacting patient care, improving the lives of patients and families, and helping hospitals do that more efficiently and effectively. So started casting a net in diagnostics, and was fortunate to get an opportunity to join GenMark when it was a relatively new company here in San Diego Carlsbad area. And I got in pretty early. We had roughly 80 employees at the time. There's a long history to GenMark of why we actually did have some products and employees at that stage. But the
Hmm.
company itself was relatively new, about a year and a half old at that stage when I joined. And I was really one of the early marketing people hired to uh, I would say, take the company vision into that next generation. So we had a legacy product line, and they hired me to say, okay, we need to evolve our story, our message, our capabilities, and ultimately, drive more value for shareholders.
Right. Understood. Now, look, before we're going to go deep into the GenMark story because it's a fascinating story and you spent a significant amount of time there. What are you up to now before we do that? What are you currently doing, Scott?
Yeah, thanks. So after GenMark was acquired by Roche, I went to another startup, was there for a short time, which also acquired by a larger company, BMRU. And after kind of looking at my options to stay in the space with BMRU, I chose to take a break, honestly, and not a very long one. I took about 4 weeks off, but then I started consulting. And my main reason for that was, I think I got a lot of experience over that career evolution, especially I would say at GenMark was a microcosm of a crash course in how to do things wrong and then quickly course correct. So I wanted to leverage that knowledge and help companies. And at that time, when I started consulting, it's still true today, there is a lot of great technologies that are being invented, developed, but most of these companies have kind of a scientific slant, scientific founder, scientific team, and not necessarily a very good understanding of the market, of what it takes to get to market, of what it even takes to develop a product, go through FDA approval, and ultimately succeed commercially. So I really wanted to leverage that knowledge and help companies. And I would say the vast majority of my consulting work has been around these newer enabling technologies that are just still in development or just starting to get to market. And it's been really enjoyable, really fun. It's very diverse. You get to see a lot of different perspectives on how these technologies can be used in the market, and find it very rewarding to basically be able to leverage that prior experience and help these companies, hopefully, towards greater success.
With your consulting role, because obviously you're working across a few different companies, a C-suite level, commercial strategy.
Mhm.
Are you? Maybe a better question is how often are you shocked at how little commercial strategy or commercial appreciation is for when you get into companies early on, because it's a recurring theme that comes up, and
Yeah.
there's so many facets to commercial strategy around approvals and regulatory
Yeah.
pathways, reimbursement and
Yes.
coverage. It's commercial strategy is not sales. It's so much to it. But
Right.
how often do you get in and you're like, oh wow, what don't we have, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, great question. And I would say that's the vast majority of cases
Yeah,
where, and it's not, again, it's not a surprise. Many of
yeah,
these companies are founded by people that were principal investigators that have been, running lab teams. Some are, fresh out of an academic environment.
yeah,
Others might be on their second company, but the first one was really just a tech IP play.
yeah.
So it's not surprising that's the case, but I go into expecting it. I guess in a few cases, there have been situations where the company is actually more mature in terms of product development and getting closer to market, and still hasn't developed that commercial strategy,
Mm,
and thinks that they can kind of like, okay, we'll just raise enough money to get this through FDA clearance and then we'll figure it out. But I can tell you that's never works. The problem with that is that you end up with a product that you can sell, but no commercial strategy, no commercial infrastructure, no mechanism to target the right customers, no mechanism to really generate leads and drive a true, what I call a commercial engine. And you
mm,
end up with a product on market, and 18 months later, you've made very few sales. And the reason why is you just haven't used the time available to you, because it does take a long time to develop and get through FDA approvals and trials to effectively build that commercial strategy. And I think, to your point, some of the stuff that's lost is people focus so much on pricing. Like, that's the biggest thing. Like, how do we get this priced, and do we use a direct sales channel or a distributor? Like, I think those basic questions are always explored, but then there's so much underneath of how do we, ensure that we can sell this product? How do we track the product? How do we make sure that we have a full device history record of every product we put in the market, which is an FDA requirement? What's the market access? What's the reimbursement? How does the money flow? How do we pitch this? And who are our target customers? How do we support it? How do we have service and warranty? And what kind of field staff do we need? And like, there's all these considerations commercially that I'm surprised that don't sort of surprise some of these clients and CEOs that I work with. Yeah, I would think that they would have some thought of this, and generally I think commercial ends up being an afterthought. And I think it's doing a lot of these companies a disservice in terms of not only how they think about developing their products, but also how they're thinking about raising money and returning that value to their investors. Because if they don't do it early, ultimately their returns are going to be delayed at best or underachieve at worst.
At Alevra Consulting, we focus on DX only, supporting early stage and growth companies achieve their milestones by solving their biggest talent challenges. Have you ever suffered from working with a talent partner who was either life sciences or med tech and dabbling in diagnostics? Or no more? Work with a diagnostics specialist talent partner. Yeah, interesting. I speak to a lot of companies who are ready to sell and haven't even thought about reimbursement. And then you speak to like a reimbursement expert and they're like, we should have been involved at the product level, the development level, if you're going to produce a product that is set up to be reimbursed. And now it's going to take longer to unpack it before we can anyway, but you know, it goes
Yes.
round and round but
Yeah.
um so let's talk GenMark. So when you joined, you said it was pretty early on, 18 months, 80 people. What were they trying to achieve at the time, and what was that sort of, vision or strategy that
Mhm.
they were going after?
Yeah, yeah. I'll provide a tiny bit of context before I get into it. So, um, GenMark, the actual original company was Clinical Microsensors, founded in 1995 by Dr. Fez Kayem. He sold that company to Motorola about five years later. Motorola Life Sciences was a new division. They acquired this technology to start building a life science group. And ultimately, they chose, after a short period of time, that this wasn't for them. They divested it to a company called Osmotech. And then Osmotech was struggling for money, and Dr. Kayem, Fez Kayem, got back involved in this Osmotech days. And he and another gentleman, Chris Gleason, who was the CEO of Ventana, and Ventana had sold to Roche. So Chris and Fez got together and they said, let's bring this company back to the US. It was in the UK. Let's put it on the NASDAQ stock exchange and build um, a different type of product. So, kind of getting to the core of your question, what clinical microsensors and eventually early days of GenMark was electrochemical sensor detection in a high multiplex format. So, really, what we were doing was what I would call, 30, 50 target multiplexing, but in a more clinically user friendly profile. And what I mean by that is it wasn't a 96 well qPCR plate, right? With individual wells. It was kind of a single consumable that had all this large multiplex capability. And it worked really well. And we had a few products at that time. But when GenMark started, the vision really quickly was that what the product that we had called the e-sensor prior to that was great, but it was manual. It still required extraction of nucleic acid separately, offline amplification of PCR separately, and then the product that GenMark sold was really just the detection cartridge. So you had to kind of do everything else up front. Long workflow, 5, 6 hours, lots of hands-on steps, etc. So it worked
Mm,
okay for high complex labs. But the vision was, how do we take that concept and put it in a super simple, easy to use, rapid sample to answer cartridge? Uh, we had just seen Idaho Technologies, which later became BioFire, which is
mm,
arguably probably the biggest success story in this space, in the space of infectious disease sample answer multiplexing. We just saw them launch, and effectively we said, okay, they're going to establish a market. We need to be a really fast follower and do it better than them. So that was our goal. So our goal was to really build that really elegant, novel, easy to use sample answer system that still could do 30 to 50 multiplex, but the only thing a customer had to do was load a sample, put a cartridge in an instrument, and that's it. And everything else is 100% automated. And it was an ambitious goal, as we later found out, but that was why I was hired, was to spend my first year doing a lot of voice of customer, really exploring the market space and understanding how do we design a product, because when I joined, we really didn't have much, but a product from the perspective of instrumentation, graphical user interface software, software connectivity, workflow, and product panels or tests how do we design those things to make us unique, differentiated, and really compete in the space, knowing we weren't going to be
Mm.
first. So that was my first year there. It's really exciting, and I think we did an excellent job of that. The thing that we probably didn't do so great at was understanding the complexity of what we were trying to achieve, and how long it was going to take to develop that, and what it was going to take to actually get it to market. That was the area where GenMark arguably struggled. Ultimately, it was a success story, but that was certainly a tough time.
That's interesting. So, being second to market, how did you guys decide how you were going to differentiate? What was the sort of one thing that you or if there, maybe it was more, but what was the sort of thing that you tried to present as the better
Yeah,
than the BioFire product?
yeah. I would at a very high level, I'd put it as workflow. Um, that's a kind of a catch-all. Um, we knew that it wasn't going to be easy, and I don't think it is easy in molecular diagnostics as a whole to differentiate on performance. There's a performance standard that you have to hit, and if you don't hit it, no one's going to buy your product. So there's not. I mean, there's a delta of performance out there of a few percentage points, but realistically, that is not a huge driver. It's not
Mm,
easy to differentiate on content. What I mean by content is targets and what you have in there. As an example, there's dozens of respiratory panels now. They're all pretty similar. I mean, there's slight variations, but again, that you can kind of sell through those, and those variations are usually minor. So what we had to differentiate on was, how do we construct our instrument? How do we make sure that the workflow is a lot easier than what became BioFire was Idaho Technologies, but how do we make sure it's easier than BioFire? And how do we make sure that the kind of user experience end to end is
mm,
seamless? And I would say those areas we really succeeded. And I'll just provide one quick example. So we the BioFire system initially was a single instrument, runs a single cartridge, or they actually call it a pouch, but cartridge for simplicity's sake. Um, what GenMark did was say, okay, let's design a system that's more high throughput capable. Let's put one together that's got a really nice, simple touchscreen where any technician of any capability can use it. It's three touches to get every function in the software. Let's build it where it has towers, and we each tower has 6 cartridge bays, so there's redundancy. So if one fails, the rest are still running, so you don't have to worry about instrument downtime ever, really effectively. And let's make it so it's expandable, so we could run a system which is 3 cartridge bays or 24 cartridge bays. And what that led to was, I would say in the first year and a half, 2 years, was GenMark supplanting the BioFire business or gaining new business in these larger volume settings. So, settings where maybe they had 10 film array systems, but the workflow was not great. It was all individualized. Systems could go down. There was no good LIS connectivity. We said, all right, bring our system in. You can connect this to LIS really easily. We have this great throughput for you. It's in a really small footprint. The workflow is simpler, and let's go. And it resonated extremely well with larger hospitals and larger labs in the US. And that was, as I mentioned, the first 18 months of our sales was all in those sites, which is also advantageous because all those sites are really large volume users. So you not only get the advantage of capturing some market share from the competition because you have that competitive differentiation in the area that matters most to those customers, but we're driving really large annual annuity because we targeted those biggest sites first.
that's super interesting. We're actually getting really into the execution and result of commercial strategy, aren't we? So the in my assumption is you were explaining the user experience of the product would be that you actually create a really sticky and loyal customer base. Was that a key part of GenMark's success with the products?
Yeah, 100%. So I think, again, we knew strategically that we would not have likely not have the same reach as our competition. We're a smaller
Right.
company. We didn't have as deep of pockets, and we were later to market. So
Yeah.
we emphasized heavily that component of, we do a lot of work to get a customer to contract with you or to start using your system clinically, and you can't afford to lose that. So we put a lot of emphasis on what I would call the direct and indirect connections to maintain that customer. The direct connections are things like, we're hooked up to their LIS, and once that's linked, that's not an easy thing to undo. We later added some software capabilities for one of our blood culture identification sort of sepsis products that also made it more sticky by implementing kind of the standard of care in the hospital through a separate software interface that talked really well with our ePlex system and with the LIS. We made it more sticky there. We had amazing application specialists that built relationships and tech support people that built relationships that kept those customers longer term. That's kind of the indirect connections where, um, you know, I don't know exactly, but we had roughly like greater than 95% customer retention for every single year I was there. And that continued. We had very few losses of customers once we signed them. So it was because of that, both I would call product design aspect and the customer centric view and support that we delivered. And that continually stood out amongst customers when we interviewed them and surveyed and talked to them about it.
That's so interesting. Because if we take it back to what your background was and your role within sort of product management, you must have been at the forefront of these decisions that were being made on the product based on the feedback you were getting from customers, right? If so much of the success of the company was about the user experience, did you feel, I mean, that must have been quite a rewarding role to sort of be at the middle of customers and product. That would How did your role then therefore develop as you were there? Because you were there for, was it 10 years in the end?
Nearly 10 years, yeah, just shy. But yeah, no, great question. And I started off, as I mentioned, really in the product marketing side and focused on that first piece, which is what product do we need to develop? One example I'll also share is, I mean, we spent a lot of time just on our how our software was going to work and interface, which I would say most companies that's an afterthought. For us, it was front and center. And even if you see the instrument, the software touchscreen is probably one of the biggest ones in the market. And that was by design. And we that's just one example of how much emphasis we put on that user experience early, with the concept of flexibility. If we can go into a small volume account, but really we're building this arguably for medium to larger volume accounts. Um, on the After we sort of initially spec that instrument, and I would say it kind of got turned over to R&D. There was always marketing involvement, obviously, but R&D knew what they had to build. My role started to shift. So I would say every 18 months, I had a slightly different role, which is a product of a kind of a dynamic growing company. And my first role after that product marketing role was really leading our customer service and support teams. So I was asked to effectively expand, up level, put more process behind it, make it more robust, and just ensure that we were really efficient and very customer centric. So we expanded our customer tech support team, our customer service people, and probably most impactfully, our field applications team. We had a great group of people, but we continued to put a lot of more structure around that, up level that group, and make that group, I would say, in combination with tech support, again, one of those superpowers that GenMark had, where the applications people were both an extension of our sales team almost, but also that on the ground customer to customer interaction. And the tech support team was 24/7 available and ultra customer attentive. So we we emphasized that interaction, and I was fortunate to be a part of that build. So that was about an 18-month to a year process where I really owned that group and up leveled it. And we continue to do that over time, but that was really the first big stepwise improvement in how GenMark was functioning in that regard.
Wow. You mentioned earlier on that there was some challenges in terms of how long it took to develop some things, in terms of maybe the expectations not being fully developed, in terms of, it took
Yep.
much longer than what you thought it would. What did you mean by that?
Yeah. So without getting too technical on it, I would summarize it as what we were trying to do had never been done. So at a high level, I would say, most sample to answer type diagnostic devices are some kind of plastic based consumable with microfluidic valves and pumps and those types of things. A lot of movements, a lot of instrument interface potentially, uh, or a consumable that requires a lot of preparation. So GenMark took the approach of we're going to do this all through electrical interface, which is very different. So we use combined electrochemical detection, which was our core technology that Dr. Fezkaim had invented, with electrowetting, which is a movement of fluid on a circuit board through electricity. So combining those two technologies proved far more challenging than we had expected. And again, something
Mm,
that no one had ever done prior. There's now a couple examples of people doing this, but at that time, no one had. So we embarked upon a scientific endeavor that just we really didn't understand the unknowns, or what we used to call the unknown unknowns. We had a lot of those along the way, which led to our development being, 3x longer than we had initially anticipated. So we were a public
mm,
company, which means every 90 months you tell everybody everything that's going on. And effectively, we had to continually update our timelines and provide details of why we were slipping and why our time to market was different. Ultimately, again, it was a success story, but we underestimated the product development challenge in front of us. I will say that in doing that, we obviously made trade offs. Every company must make trade offs when developing a product. But the trade-off we didn't make was on that customer user experience and workflow. So we really said that's one thing we can't give up on. There's other things we can bend and compromise, but that's one thing we can't. And that's ultimately still which helped us be successful despite those delays in getting to market.
mm. When you see the financial reports coming out in the diagnostics field, especially early stage single product companies at the moment that have chosen to go to market early, um, do you have sort of sympathy for what they're going through? Because some of the stock prices you see, they don't look great
Yep.
whatsoever, right? But you see their financial results and you're like, I get it, keep going. Like you sort of pray for them to have enough runway to see it through, but unfortunately some don't, and we've seen many a case there. But was there a period there where you were sort of in that development stage, and you now have sort of sympathy for
100%.
those companies?
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%. There was Genmark was fortunate in that we did have a legacy product, and that product
right,
was still generating revenue, although growth had slowed quite a bit around 2016 when we were close to launching ePlex. But that did generate some ability to show that we were still successful commercially
right.
with different assays. Respiratory and hepatitis genotyping were kind of our two flagships at the time. But what happened was we kept telling Wall Street this product's coming, and then we delay it. So when we did launch ePlex in 2017, we had 3 years of, I would say, not perfect, but consistent um, commercial performance. And what I mean by that is we tell everybody externally, these are our targets for Q1, Q2, Q3, and we pretty much hit almost of those targets consecutively for nearly 3 years, 2.5 years.
Wow.
In that time, the stock market price did not move. We didn't get a benefit. We didn't necessarily go down, but it just was stagnant, which was tough because we have the product we all wanted. We were hitting our internal metrics, which we commuted externally. We were hitting. Our analysts were saying these are good targets. Yes, of course, we want better, but these are good. So we were hitting all those analyst targets, but the investors weren't responding to it. So we were pretty flat through that whole period, which is better than being down, but not where you want to be when you feel like you're executing commercially very well. And I think the reason for that is it was hard to regain um, some of the uh, reliability, I would say, and trust from the market because we had so many delays and so many updates, and now they're saying, okay, you guys are doing well, but are you going to continue to do this? And I think that runway of us executing in order to prove ourselves expanded, and it wasn't really until, frankly, COVID hit where we had this massive stepwise improvement in really every financial metric, and the stock really started responding at that point. Um, Obviously, I think that's the case for many, many companies, although I will caveat that and say that I don't think every company executed as well as GenMark did. Some certainly did, but there's examples for sure of many that did not. And that was part of what I'm proud of, and a lot of people that worked at GenMark through a challenging time, frankly, in terms of COVID,
Yeah.
we're proud of because we made the right decisions and we made them quickly, and we operated as a really high functioning unit and team.
That's interesting, Scott. So with the pre-COVID period when you were actually live executing operational, um, the stock price wasn't moving. Was that the internal message? Was it of continue to execute and grow? The stock price will follow when it follows, and just keep like did you guys grow and scale in terms of and bring on more risk in terms of headcount and cost and stuff like that, or did the stock price impact decisions internally and sort of cause more hesitation and cautiousness?
Yeah, no, great question. And I would say it was a bit of both, right? So the company continued to raise money. We continued to invest. We added, certainly people on the operations side, as because that was part of our scale, and people on the commercial side. And those were the two big investments we continued to make from, I would call it early 2017 on up to that 2020 kind of marker point. So we continued to do that. We continued to hit our commercial goals. The goals were, I would say, always relatively aggressive given the market state, and we had a team that executed very well. So I think the marketing side, sales side, support, what I'd call kind of the entire commercial organization. Um, Worked extremely well during that time, and it wasn't without challenge because people do get frustrated, they would get discouraged when the metric sometimes that everyone looks at is that stock price, and it wasn't reflecting the effort and the execution. But the message was exactly as you stated. It was, I would say, the message was two things. One, it was that first point of keep executing, keep doing what we're doing. Eventually, we'll see reward for that effort because it was going
Yeah.
well, and we launched a second set of products. So we started with respiratory. We then moved to a sepsis set of products. So really strong product offering, and we were starting to see really good traction of that just before COVID. So there was a lot of enthusiasm, encouragement in the company as a whole. The other thing that we kept people focused on, I would say, throughout development and even through this kind of challenging commercial time, was we were we kept a good focus throughout the history of GenMark on why we were doing this. Of course, it's to generate revenue and return for investors, but the big thing that we did a nice job of was focusing on patients. So, early days we had engaged cystic fibrosis survivors or patients and families because we had a cystic fibrosis product. Later, we did hepatitis C. Then we moved to respiratory, and then we moved to sepsis. And we kept these engagements with these advocacy groups and with these families and these patients, and we heard their stories, and we brought that back into the organization. And when times are tough, if you know what you're doing is not just for the corporate aspects, but it's for kind of that the common healthcare and the patient and the life-saving aspect of what you're delivering, it gives people that little extra motivation and it bumps up morale. So I would say the messaging as well as some of the very deliberate practices being patient-centric helped GenMark weather some of these tough storms. And then personally for me, that was absolutely the case.
What was the culture like through that growth, Scott? Because probably the one thing we haven't really touched on,
Yeah.
but sort of now touching on it in terms of the reminder of the why. What was the culture like through those pre-COVID years? And obviously there were, there was chat. It sounds like, startup life, challenging periods, but that's
Yes.
part and parcel of it. But what was the GenMark culture like?
Yeah, no, I would say it's the first company, it's the only company that I've experienced where when I joined in 2012, the culture was really front and center. And what I mean by that is a lot of companies talk culture, well, they don't necessarily have the tools or the rigor to practice it. And Genmark did. So we had the tools for providing feedback. More importantly, we had the tools for providing recognition. And we maintained that across the organization at the highest levels of leadership throughout. And we focused on, hiring people that were not only A players, but we thought would embody that culture. And I would say for the early years, we did that extremely well. But we had bumpiness along the way. Certainly, when our product development delays kept hitting, it was hard to maintain that focus because
Yeah.
focus shifted on like, all right, it's all hands on deck. We're working weekends for the next year to recover some of this product development slip. Once we launched commercially, and we were really excited for how great it was going to be, and we didn't see that um, benefit from a share price compared to the execution we thought we were making, that was a tough time in terms of culture, and we probably lost some of it. And I would say as we scaled and hired more, it was harder to keep that culture because you get a more diverse team. And, early days when I joined, every person would go through 2 days of culture training. Well, that became sort of non achievable when you get to several hundreds of employees and you're hiring at a really rapid rate. You can't necessarily afford to do that for every single person. So we lost certainly some of that aspect. I would say we started to regain it right before COVID hit. We put kind of a new emphasis on it. We always did employee surveys every year. We put a fair amount of pressure on leadership to embody and practice culture and do and show by example. Um, but it definitely was ups and downs. And I would say, as companies get bigger and bigger, it's harder to maintain that because part of that culture practice and tools requires a lot of like direct interaction. And as you get a bigger and bigger organization, uh, in a way you become more siloed and your interactive
Yeah.
groups are smaller, even though the company's so much larger. Whereas in Genmark early days, I knew everybody that worked there for many, many, many years
Yeah.
until much later on.
But I think that's I actually really love your answer because I think it's really honest and I think it's really relevant to all startups that I think in theory or in dreamland more like I think people think that they can have this startup culture which is really transparent and
Yeah.
everyone's in it together and it's actually really incredibly rewarding and you go through every win and every challenge together and then as you grow it's like we need to retain all these people but the reality is as you grow those people that are so used to that startup environment inevitably start to feel a bit disconnected with what the company becomes as it grows just because
100%.
nothing's gone wrong, it's just a
Right.
different company. It has to be a
Hmm.
different company with more process and systems. It can't be
Exactly.
audio and face to face in everything it does. We need systems to elevate people, but it's I think startups get that wrong that they think it's a straight line with the same people and everyone who joins you can be here forever. But actually there's more honesty and more benefit to going when we go from being small to medium, whatever that means. When we go from being small to medium, there's people that won't be the same in terms of their production or execution when it's a medium company they're not right
Yeah.
anymore and it's
Yeah.
okay for them to leave and bring in people who are sort of fit for purpose now. That's actual startup growth, not,
Yeah.
the same 10 people and, are still here. And it's just like, doing what? How,
Yeah.
what do they bring to the table now? Um,
100%. I mean, companies need to evolve, and I think that's part of, the founder and the CEO and the leadership's job is to say, hey, what we had at the time was good and we had all the right pieces in the right places, but we need to change some of those pieces and places and perspectives. And we always made the joke, like when I joined GenMark, we were sort of an infant. And by the time we were acquired by Roche, we were probably like a teenager. So we still hadn't gotten
right.
mature enough, but we had gone through that evolution. And I would say like three phases of company inflection
Yeah.
to get to that point, and it looked really different across those three phases.
Yeah. The quicker founders realize that people are not fit for every purpose
Right.
and phase, or fit
Yeah,
for every
exactly.
phase, they're better prepared to handle them evolutions in the company. What
Correct.
what did that scale actually look like in terms of numbers of revenue and headcount? And I guess there's sort of it feels like you've got the early days, the pre-COVID days, and then the COVID post-COVID days. What did it look like?
Yeah, I mean, so the very early days when I was there, in 2012, 2011, 2012, 2013, we were, um, you know, when I joined, we did 5 million of revenue the prior year. We actually had a big jump to 20 million after I joined. Not necessarily attributed to me, but because of some of the new products we were launching.
Mm,
And then we continued to kind of 2013 was a good growth year, and then that old product, that eSensor XT8 product started to slow. So revenue stagnated at some point, kind of after that 2013 ramp. During that time, all of our hiring was really R&D. And when I say R&D, that was, bench scientists, engineering, software people, that whole group. So we
yeah.
we really invested heavily in that group, and that was our primary spend. We then hit a point where we were flat for a bit, then ePlex launched, and we saw, I would say, consistent good growth, high double digit, like 20, 30, 40% average growth kind of over that time, before COVID. And then the investment shifted. It shifted to operations and commercial. And that's when the group got fairly big. Frankly, the operations function in GenMark, because we didn't compromise on workflow. The consumable that we built was complex because that the user had to do was really easy. So the consumable itself was complicated. So the manufacturing process and the operations required a lot of people, which
Mm,
required that was a big department in GenMark. So it went from kind of R&D being the biggest group to operations being the biggest group. Then we started investing more in commercial as well. By the time we hit COVID, we had gone from, when I joined, about 80 people, to pre-COVID probably about 600 people. That included some temp workers as
wow.
well on the manufacturing side. So
Yeah.
ultimately, post-COVID, so from that kind of beginning of 2020 through 2020, basically to the end of 2020 and into 2021, we had gone from, roughly 80 million in revenue in 2019 to 170 million in revenue at the end of 2020. So almost a little about 2x, 100%
Yeah.
growth. And then we had gone from roughly that 600 or so people to nearly just under 1,000. Again, mostly on operations because we'd scaled our manufacturing facilities significantly during that time. Again, those 1,000, a lot of
Mm,
those were temp workers on the manufacturing line. So we'd grown a lot from when I joined, from 5 million to 170, from 80 people to call it 900. Significant growth in that 10-year time period. And it was in late 2020 when we started a process, from an M&A perspective. So it was basically Q4 of 2020 when we started engaging a bank to represent us and talking with and presenting to potential strategics that were looking to acquire.
How did you feel about the acquisition? Were you excited by it? Was it something that, not to be negative about it because it's not the point, but I mean, like, was it something that you knew sort of marked the end of your journey there, or how did you personally sort of feel about the acquisition?
Yeah, personally, I thought it was great for shareholders and for the company, for all the employees. I will say we weren't counting on it. We were developing a strategy. We had money in the bank from raising at a very good share price, and we were looking at partnerships and acquisitions ourselves. So we were at a point where we felt like we could diversify the company and not be a single product player. Once we got interest of being acquired by others, we put that work on hold and focused entirely on engaging strategics. So in Q4 of 2020, we began discussions with various strategic acquirers. We presented to roughly 10 different companies starting Q4. That process ran through basically Q1 of 2021. And we put a deadline. We had two highly interested parties that were doing full due diligence, which was an amazing amount of effort. And we basically stated to them due diligence is ending mid March. Final offers are expected, so they put their final offers in, and Roche acquired the company for 1.8 billion, which was just over 10x revenue multiples. So I think it exceeded really some of the expectations that
Yeah,
the company and the board had in terms of acquisition. It helped that there was two companies bidding for GenMark, certainly in generating that ultimate acquisition price. And Roche is a great fit. So I think, from that was one of the conversations we were having strategically is who would we want to acquire the company? Because it was still important to us that the people, the products, the vision continue to be executed. And we felt like Roche was a great partner to do that. And I would say they've
mhm,
done a really nice job since. For me personally, Roche is obviously one of the largest companies in the space, in the diagnostic space, and they move at a different pace than what GenMark moved at. They don't make decisions the way I was accustomed or the way GenMark was accustomed
yeah,
to working. So I did my transition with Roche, made sure that some of the key milestones that they asked me to achieve were completed. And then I moved into another startup, sort of similar stage to what GenMark was, frankly, uh, after leaving there. So Roche continued. Most of my team is still there. Most of the commercial team is still there. So it's continued to be, I think, a good product line and acquisition for Roche, continues to diversify them a bit in terms of their product offering, and ultimately it was probably hands down the best experience of my career those 10 years, learning everything from you know the very early days of a company. We made so many wrong decisions along the way, but we course
yeah,
corrected fast, and I think that's the thing I'm most proud of is the company's commitment to the customer, obviously, first and foremost, but second, to being willing to make quick decisions and change course if we needed to. We didn't get stuck in our own analysis, which can happen at companies. We're convinced ourselves that the first decision was the right one and we don't change it. Instead, we say, hey, the data shows us the first decision was wrong. We need to quickly pivot.
that's awesome. So, I mean, on paper, you've done it, Scott. The join the early phase company, go through all the problems and teething and growth and all this that startup companies experience. I love that you've taken away how quickly you course corrected as a key attribute to success, because I'm sure that's what you're bringing to the companies that you're consulting for now. The curse of doing what you've done and seeing it through to acquisition is now you have to face the rest of your career chasing that feeling, and which is
It's true.
what everyone does. But what an experience, because this is what people want to do, isn't it? Get the early stage company and back the right horse. But the exposure and the lessons learned along the way are just unbelievable, aren't they? Just incredible.
Yeah, it's very incredible. I'm, very fortunate to have joined GenMark when I did. It was really
Mm,
perfect timing. There was a lot of persistence to stick it out because it wasn't always easy. not everybody lasted that duration. There's actually a very small number that kind of lasted that long throughout the trials and tribulations of being there.
Yeah.
But for me personally, it was I knew the mission was the right thing, and we had a great product, and we were
Yeah.
doing the right stuff. Um, I was confident that the results would come because we had the right team, we had the right ideas. We were in a challenging market space, absolutely, and we didn't have the size and scale of our competitors, but we continued to make gains, and maybe those gains weren't as big as we always wanted, but we continued to move the ball kind of down the field, so to speak. So it was a great experience, and I'm passionate about diagnostics. I that's 90% of my consulting is in the diagnostic space. And we're at a point now where I think GenMark and Biofire started some of this, and Cepheid were some of the early companies that started this revolution of developing technology that supplants standard of care and improves the patient condition. And there's so many of these small new companies doing exactly that. They just need a little bit better market situation, the ability to get some funding, and then there's really an opportunity to change how diagnostics is done as a whole in the hospital. And I can see great things over the next 5 to 7 years in that space where we'll see technologies and capabilities that fundamentally change how some of these both acute diseases, infectious diseases, and cancer are treated and managed.
Scott, it's incredibly rewarding to hear your optimism for the space, right? Because you know this based
Yep.
on the current landscape. It's very easy to be pessimistic right now, right? It's the current feeling of pessimism. You know, the whole "this too shall pass." You know that mentality. It's easy to be optimistic when the market's booming, right? And
Correct.
actually, with your experience and knowledge and the perspective you now see across, you know, many different companies and types of diagnostics, it's great to hear that you're optimistic based on what you know. That's something that really powerful. But um, to be honest, the way you've explained the journey of GenMark, what I love is the honesty around um, mistakes, challenges, hurdles that needed to be overcome, the expectations that were set out, but were maybe sort of naive, for want of a better word, in terms of how
Correct.
quickly things can get done. These are actual startup takeaways, you know, and
Yeah.
that's awesome to hear. So, Scott, I really appreciate you sort of telling this story today and picking it apart. Your perspective is incredible, and I think that any early stage founder or C-suite that listens to this can really take that away and sort of really, and also sort of, you know, swallow the challenges a bit better and go, this is just part of it. You've got to keep executing. You've got to keep
Correct.
moving the ball down the field, to quote you. But Scott, thank you so much for coming on and telling the story. It was awesome.
Oh, my pleasure, David. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.